Yo, parish orphans and retrogrades, happy Sunday. We have a special show lined up for you today. It will be Steph that leads today's program, and she will be walking you through a class on a chapter from Ask Your Husband. It's the most controversial chapter. It's called Wear What He Likes, Do What He Likes. It's an absolutely unique message for Christian wives. It is the chapter that caused the biggest disturbance among the Christian feminists who hated her book. Sorry, I had my weightlifting gloves on still. It is the most helpful among the women who have written us so many plenary emails saying that it turned their entire life around for them. We cut off from her private class the remarks in the remarks section, when women can ask her pepper her with questions at the end of the class. This was originally a private class on Thursday. Because there's a lot of private info in there, we're going to try to blank out the faces and censor it, but ultimately it was too much private info. But one of the girls, without mentioning names, said on the basis of this chapter and some other positive influences, she lost 200 pounds. That is me. She lost me in weight because it was the first time she was hearing in a really compelling, forceful way, women need to, in whatever capacity they can, look good for their husbands. It's not okay to just bring mediocrity, morally speaking, aesthetically speaking, to the table for husbands or wives. We have so many emails saying that Steph's book changed the marriage because it changed the wife who was refusing to try to be pleasant, submissive, a helpmeet, beautiful, slim. Try her best. No one's perfect. But these women all say, hundreds of emails say, we've never been told you have to try. That's astounding. This is the class she walked through. She's been going through for patrons of Subscribestar and Locals, chapter by chapter, a private set of classes. I think we all opened it up to everyone, but it's pretty private. It feels like, 100 people are in the class. We wanted to do this chapter open to the public, specially available for all of you because it was so valuable. So we're gonna play that class in just a second. I want to plug a couple of things. First off, please like and subscribe to this channel. We are darn near 50,000 subscribers. The 50,000 subscriber show is going to be a big deal. We expect it later this week or early next week. We're going to kind of pause everything, have a celebration show. Tons of friends of the show are going to call in. I have two very big announcements that I've been waiting to make for this 50K subscriber show. Just all sorts of special guests out the wazoo. And we have a special call-in number. It's like a 1-800 number. I forget what the prefix is. It's not 800. For you guys to call in with your questions, it's going to be just a great time. A great time in mid to late winter to celebrate what's good in the year of our Lord, early 2024. With all the bad that's happened, we're going to be focusing on the good. So you got to subscribe to this channel, got to like this channel. It's a very unique product that we offer here in the Catholic space, in the so-called manosphere, in right-wing Ethernet space in general. Rules for Retrogrades has occupied and been honored to occupy a very unique space with the 4 books associated with the channel, the 4 pillars. Really, it's 5 books because Ask Your Husband doubles as a female companion piece to the case for patriarchy. Patriarchy being one of our pillars alongside subsidiarity, right-wing community organizing, and re-education. Okay, so if you want to support the channel, please do so on Locals and Subscribestar. We need your help. It goes a great ways. Get ready for that 50,000 subscriber show. It's so amazing. If you want to support yourself, go to www.realestateforlife.org and get out of your blue state, get to a red state. People are doing this before the big general election, and it makes sense to do so. Finally, I want to plug something very special that's happening in May. It'll be happening over the anniversary of Fatima. We are now at 107 years since the Fatima apparitions of Our Lady to 3 shepherd children. Patrick Coffin is running this very special Bishop Strickland guided tour apparitional pilgrimage to 3 Marian shrines, not just Portugal, but it's got a Portugal segment, which will be from May 5th to the 11th. That'll be 5 days. It's got a France segment where they'll go to Lourdes from May 15th to May 23rd. That'll be 9 days. And it's got a Spain segment, which will be from May 23rd to May the 26th. You can get a package deal where you buy all of them at once, or you could just go for one segment of the trip or 2 legs of the trip. The number to call is 760-409-3766. It's led by Bishop Joseph Strickland together with Patrick Coffin. You can also go on the internet to patrickcoffin.media/pilgrimage if you don't want to call the number for it, which is 760-409-3766. 3 legs of the journey. You could parcel it out if you want to pay less, spend less time, or you can go all 3 legs. If you mention my name, Timothy Gordon, you will get a special discount, and you can find out how to do the special discount there at patrickcoffin.media/pilgrimage. 5 days in Portugal, 9 in France, 4 in Spain. You can piecemeal it or you can wholesale it. It's a great thing to do for the 107th anniversary of the Fatima apparition, to go also to Spain, to go also to France. I really, really encourage you, if you have some extra time to play with this summer, go for it with Patrick Dave Coffin and Bishop Joseph Strickland. Without further ado, I give you Wear What He Likes, Do What He Likes from this book, with a final reminder this book has sold off the shelves, even in its 2nd edition, its self-published edition. We've sold so many copies of this thing. Go get it today. If you don't have it, ask your husband. You can get a signed copy from timothyjgordon.com, or you can go on Amazon and get a regular copy. It's an amazing book, and it created a bigger wave than The Case for Patriarchy, which surprised all of us. Get this book today. This is, I think, chapter 7 or 8 from the book. What is it, 8? 6, sorry. Got more chapters in it than my book, Case for Patriarchy. It's got 8 chapters in it, and Steph is now 6/8 of the way through lecturing it. This is arguably the most flammable of chapters. Enjoy Steph's lecture. Deus Vult.
Okay, everybody, welcome to chapter 6. This is by far my absolute favorite chapter of the book. This one was the most fun to write, and probably I'd say the one I'd get the most love mail and hate mail for. So if you already read it, then you know why. Let me get my presenter going here. All right, so chapter 6 is Wear What He Likes and Do What He Likes. This here. Okay. All right. So under the subheading of honoring preferences makes marriage great again. I say right off the bat that spouses ought to dedicate themselves to keeping the romance alive. That requires a great deal of effort on both spouses. This is especially true the longer you've been married and when rapport becomes more comfortable and the notorious rut threatens to set in. Husbands who are typically intentional and goal-oriented frequently lose sight of this fact when they stop wooing their wives after the wedding day. A husband ought to pursue his wife like he did when their courtship was beginning, striving to earn her tender affections. He should take his wife on regular dates, show a more active interest in her day's triumphs and travails, and proffer her meaningful tokens of his affection, and refresh her morale with sincere compliments. These sound like tokens, but they prove quite meaningful to his bride. So we'd like to talk a lot in society about what husbands need to do to keep their wives' attention and to keep their wives feeling well. We rarely talk about that in regards to what women need to do better. So I really try to focus on that particular topic in this chapter. So wives, who are typically sentimental and present tense oriented, frequently lose sight of the fact that men remain the same visually oriented creatures they were during their courtship and haven't become massive jerks for maintaining and expressing their attraction to objective beauty. By way of example, and this was a really fun thing that I during my research I found and made total sense. Oxford scientists have theorized that babies were created to be cute so that their mothers are subliminally constantly encouraged to care for them, even when the infant proves to be incredibly challenging. Just as God created babies to be cute so their mothers would nurture them, God created women to be beautiful so their husbands would remain attracted to them. A wife can certainly help her husband's daily pursuit of her by looking pretty for him and keeping in shape. We'll get into this later. But exterior beauty ought not to stop there. It should lead a husband to his wife's heart. Clearly, the best marriages are constituted by husbands and wives who remember these sex-specific challenges every day. Okay, so continuing on. So both sexes would do themselves a great service to remember the key to keeping romance alive and well is to be mindful of your spouse's preference. Again, we talk a lot in society about women, what women prefer and what makes us feel better. We feel very uncomfortable talking about what make men feel good and what they prefer in their wives. So the willingness to adapt yourself, women, to impress your spouse is a good and holy thing. Modernists and feminists have tried to convince us that no one but a woman has the right to express a marital preference. Everyone besides women and wives should be utterly tolerant of those items of marital life which repulse them. The reason for the wild success of the feminists in popularizing the come as you are platitude is the partial truth it conveys. Yes, we all ought to be afforded unconditional love and dignity as human beings, but intimacy and authentic happiness in marriage is far more complicated than that. Remember, there was one perfect man and one perfect woman, and the rest of us have endless catching up to do. Intimacy in exemplary marriages requires a constant effort and sacrifice on both parts, not just the man. Okay. So to be clear, I'm not advocating for nitpicking. I get accused of this somewhat often, or derision by one spouse against the other. My advice presents a fine line to walk. Such sensitive matters ought to be handled with the utmost love, care, and respect. If your spouse gathers enough gumption to tenderly express to you a specific way that you might easily approve upon toward the increase of your relationship's intimacy, I advise you to please take heed. Listening whenever possible and satisfying your spouse's preference is just plain courteous. So doing will ensure a lasting marriage. As considerate wives, we care abundantly about each of our husband's preferences because we love them and we wish to please them. This was formerly known, I say in the book, as trying to be a good wife in history's nobler times, which incidentally were eras with far healthier marital statistics than we enjoy now. For instance, in the 1950s, this time period saw younger marriages, more kids, fewer divorces. In fact, the divorce rate was 2.5 divorces for every 1,000 people in 1950 and dropped to 2.3 in 1955. In 1958, the rate even slumped to 2.1 with 368,000 divorces. And I say, if you think that that's good, consider the virtually non-existent divorce rate in the late 19th century. In 1867, there were 10,000 divorces, and by 1879, there were 17,000 that year. However, the rate of divorce stayed at a very low 0.3 divorces per 1,000 Americans. In the category of least surprising fact of the day, I present for your consideration today's divorce rate statistics. About 40 to 50% of married couples in the United States divorce, which is horrible. The divorce rate for subsequent marriages is even higher, which doesn't come as a shock at all. If the popular culture hates anything in this world more than a Christian man enjoying his headship over a grateful, happy, dutiful, and obedient wife, let me know. Conversely, if the left loves anything more than the universal abidance of their preferences, so unbiological pronouns, various sexual debaucheries, murder of the innocent, etc., let me know as well. Long ago, women once viewed her wifely vocation as the highest art and the most noble calling. Wifeliness entails the expenditure of no small effort to keep her husband's attention by magnificence in her cooking, homemaking, affection, and appearance. There was once a lovelier time when women knew how to do all of these things well. If you know a woman in your life, an older woman who has gone through a successful marriage and she knows how to do those things, take heed and take note, I say, if you're lucky to know somebody like that. Unfortunately, most of us don't. So we had to kind of piecemeal and do the things the best we could. Sadly, most women today, myself included, have had to improvise because most of our elders have abandoned the art of homemaking in the period after the sexual revolution, resulting in less shared wisdom. Feminists can screech all they want. Their shrill sounding overtaxed vocal cords will really get going if they read the next section. And that is, they'll never change what men really want. And that's beautiful homemakers and beautiful homemaking. So everyone put on a brave face. Here we go. So I say in my book, skip the rest of this chapter if you're not, or meeting, if you're not ready to hear what men really want. Okay, so warning, if you subscribe to the incredibly selfish, unhealthy, and intimacy-killing body positivity movement, you're about to be genuinely offended by this entire section and very uncomfortable. Ladies, if your husband has never sat you down to request respectfully that you honor his fashion, exercise, dietary, or romantic preference, you very likely have a grave marital problem, and that is communication and honesty in your marriage. Since, like I've already mentioned, none of us is perfect, healthy marriages on occasion have many such conversations, or ought to. It's actually a good thing. Accordingly, such a taciturn husband, the one who never speaks up, can only be of the opinion that his wife would not handle such a conversation productively. Either such a man is the least assertive human being in the history of the world, or he's correct that such a conversation would prompt an unpleasant wifely tantrum. So I'm going to be honest with you. The reason I, this next bullet point is talking about this, included this in my book, is when some of the male viewers of Tim's show heard I was going to be doing this whole book, that, you know, I was working on it. I can't tell you how many good, lovely men wrote me and said, please include this in your book. It's absolutely an epidemic. Obesity is an epidemic in our country. Women just letting themselves go after marriage is a humongous problem. And I think a lot of my detractors, when I talked about this, are like, well, these are just jerks. They're not. I'm going to tell you right now, the men that wrote these emails were genuinely wanting to sexually desire their wives and to have a really great, strong bond with their wives. They're actively saying things to me like, I just really want to be close with my wife sexually. These sort of things, paying attention to her appearance, her physical health, these things would actually improve our marriage and some of the struggles that men actually just deal with. So I promised a great deal, many men, I would include this, and I'm happy to have done that. So again, I can't tell you how many emails my husband and I received through Tim's apostolate from faithful Catholic men asking how effectively to approach their wives about an unaddressed weight gluttony issue. From any male's point of view, this proves to be the granddaddy of all intimacy killers, and it's probably one of the marital topics about which we receive the most emails, hands down. This is the most frequent email that we receive, the weight gluttony issue, and then just the marital debt on to combine with that. So before any gentlewoman loses her stately composure, most of these men sincerely aim to sexually desire their wives. By reaching out for advice, they were seeking a way to fix a failing intimacy issue due to their wives letting themselves go. It's apparent from the letters that these men truly didn't want to hurt their wives' feelings. On the contrary, they were absolutely terrified of hurting their wives' feelings, which is why they were struggling so poignantly. And in their hesitancy, they were failing to address this issue with their wives. They were actually seeking, how do I handle this? How do I approach this? Okay, so since so many men struggle with addressing this sensitive issue, I promised I would do many men I would do it for them here. So to my Christian sisters still reading along or who are still in this meeting, those of you who didn't skip this section, know this, truth be told, I did promise a great many husbands I would include this entire section in the book. Wives who are the subject, witting or unwitting, of this delicate discussion should know that in nearly all of the emails that we received through the years, husbands regularly mentioned how something small like weight loss or increased wifely attention to general appearance or attention to their spouse or their husband's feelings, for instance, and this is irrespective of age, would powerfully increase their marital intimacy. So I say, hear me out before you curb my frank discussion and madly retort sexual intimacy should have little to do with weight. This is male vanity. To submit to such reasoning constitutes an erroneous claim, perhaps a borderline dereliction of one's vows should a wife not take care of herself. We all know obesity is a big problem in America. It constitutes a cardiovascular health epidemic, and among the myriad of problems it generates, 100% adversely affects marital sexual intimacy. It's one of the most obvious threats to marriage, but sadly, very few people want to address it. And I probably get the worst blowback from this exact topic, which made me think, well, I'm really glad I brought it up because this is obviously something that needs to be talked about. So Social Psychology Quarterly had this great quote that I included in my book, and it says, men, on the other hand, seem to emphasize physical appearance more strongly than do women when reflecting on the desirability of future spouses. This tendency is supported in the sex-specific listing of desirable characteristics in romance partners, and in the sex-specific emphases placed on the perceived importance of physical attractiveness in forming judgments of people. Moreover, wives' physical attractiveness is related to husbands' marital adjustment, but not vice versa. Changes in a wife's physical attractiveness, as measured by change in body type and by weight gain, affect her husband's sexual adjustment within marriage. And this is another study here that they quote. Using an evolutionary framework, argues that the particular emphasis placed by men on women's physical attractiveness reflects men's need to select romantic partners on the basis of factors signaling reproductive capacity, which everybody kind of already knows that. Buss also argues that women emphasize men's ability and willingness to invest resources in their mates and offspring, and thus rely heavily on cues such as earning capacity, ambition, and status. Now, we're very comfortable in society talking about those things with men, aren't we? Oh, what is his earning capability? How hard of a worker is he? Those sorts of things we talk about very freely. And those are the things that women typically look for in a man. But when we talk about the things that men look for in a woman, that's where everybody's faces start melting off. So for clarity and charity's sakes, let's be platonic about this and do an intimate give and take dialogue by addressing the most common objections women have and things that I've heard when I bring up this issue. So I always say, allow me to put myself under this microscope first before I put anybody else under this microscope, with an admission for myself. I've given birth to 7 children, and I have given this exact advice to myself on many, many occasions. I'm a woman who loves a good meal, and I like to, go out to eat with my husband and my family. And I find myself constantly in the position of having to mind my health and tend the preferences of my husband, who understandably prefers a healthy feminine frame. All men do, which is precisely why this is so important and worth mentioning. So objection 1 that I typically hear is, I have a disability, or I am of an advanced age and I can't safely exercise. So if you have a legitimate disability, this advice certainly doesn't apply to you. For the rest of us, controlling weight can and must be a priority if we wish to keep intimacy alive in our marriages. For the severely disabled or elderly, the lack of intimacy will prove to be an avoidable cross your husband is called to bear, and he is to treat you as Christ demands him to. Okay, objection 2. Sure, I have a weight issue, but I don't need to lose weight because my husband loves me no matter how much I weigh. Hear this one a lot. So if you're telling yourself right now that your husband loves you no matter how much you weigh, then you're right, I hope. But that's actually besides the point. You ought to be asking yourself if he is attracted to you. The odds are, if you are currently overweight, his physical attraction to you is severely waning. After all, men, as we know, are visually motivated creatures. This is just how they're created. For example, male arousal, studies find, is strongly visual, and when men engage in sexual activity or even anticipate it, the brain structures once thought to have little connection to sex spring into action. The same brain regions, however, remain relatively quiet when women are aroused. So our actual physical biology is completely different in this regard. And also common sense dictates that. We all have eyes and ears to see. So I'd respectfully invite you to ask your husband if he would support your weight loss if you suspect you have this issue. And I'd bet you your husband has been wanting to broach this conversation, yet he doesn't know how to do so without hurting your feelings. I say this, initiating the conversation on your part would prompt the comfortable expression and exchange of his honest feelings on the matter. The tough part is you just have to be willing to listen to it. So objection number 3, losing weight won't enhance my self-esteem, so why try? Some women push back against weight loss because they esteem themselves lowly at their current weight and doubt that weight loss would improve anything. And again, I say this is simply not the point. Whatever your natural feminine assets may be, shedding those extra pounds will serve to amplify your husband's current attraction to you. Literally, no one ever has become less attractive by shedding excess weight. Not to mention the health benefits of losing weight are manifold. Those benefits are, according to Harvard medical experts, a lowering of cholesterol, blood pressure, knee pain, the risk of diabetes. Weight loss also increases self-esteem, sexual desire, which is very important, quality sleep, and energy. I hear from women a lot who have a lack of sexual desire in their marriages when they are overweight, that once they start losing the extra weight, that the sexual desire actually goes quite up because it's a confidence issue, and that actually helps them with that issue in particular. Again, putting all of the emphasis on looks puts us in a danger to miss the wider issue. Losing weight has health benefits intended to increase the overall quality and length of your life. For married women, it also naturally increases the desire of your husband. Further weight loss increases sexual desire on the part of the one exercising to lose weight. Objection 4, I simply don't have the time to dedicate to exercise. So even if your current weight is healthy, you ought to carve out time in your schedule to exercise. This should be something that everybody should be doing that has the physical ability to do so. Doing so helps you to remain in good health. On average, it also enhances the odds that you will be around for your family for the long haul. So I once had to go to a cardiologist when I was pregnant with one of my kids because I was having some very irregular heartbeats during pregnancy. Turns out it was fine. But one of the things he told me is that raising the heart rate for a minimum of 30 minutes per day, 5 days a week. He actually said 6, but he said most people get very upset when you tell them that. So he says, I'll say 5 sometimes, is the bare minimum for the average person's heart health. And especially the way we eat in this country, this is not optional. Like, we do not have the amount of just crap that we have in our food and all additives and all these things. We need to be focused on our our heart health. So try your utmost to adjust your daily schedule to fit it in. It's not just about looking good. It's about putting yourself in a position to live long and healthy. You owe this to your spouse and children, and above all, God. After all, your body is meant to glorify Him. Okay, so objection 5. Why should I lose weight if my husband is overweight too? I hear this one quite often. And I say, you're right. You both should lose weight. Exercising together toward a mutual goal is a fantastic way to spend time together. Tim and I do this all the time. Our exercise routine is every day. I sometimes in the summer months here in Hattiesburg, it gets very hot, so it's hard to do exercise outside. So I have a Peloton that I work on. I don't find that actually is effective, the Peloton, to be quite honest with you, as something that I do that is far more enjoyable that I do with my husband. And we do 4.3 miles of just walking around our neighborhood 6 days a week. And that really has been a good time for us to bond. It's not like the high energy. A lot of people just absolutely hate running. I don't mind running as much, but this I find is actually a very enjoyable way to get your exercise done. And it's very good for your heart health. Tim had a great statistic about this. This was very encouraging for people who do very brisk walking like we do. And I think he said that the equivalent of the walk that we do, which is 4.3 miles, is the equivalent of running 3 miles. So it's really pretty good, pretty easy exercise, and also very good for you. And for people who are a little bit older, it's a great way to get your steps in. So there have actually been studies done on the benefits of having an exercise partner. A study from Michigan State University, for one, found that doing aerobic exercises with a partner motivated subjects to work harder and longer compared with those working out alone, and thus they improved their overall fitness results. And I certainly find that is the case when Tim and I do our walking together. Okay, so objection 6. Okay, perhaps I should lose weight, but isn't this just all vanity? So according to St. Thomas and to Aristotle, you're using the term vanity incorrectly. But yes, some people do exercise solely for narcissistic purposes. These are the people that are in the gym all the time. They know the specific body groups that they're like really going after. But in book 4 of the Nicomachean Ethics, vanity features as a vice, an excess of the virtue magnanimity, which is defined as claiming the correct amount of personal honor due. Properly understood, vanity entails claiming by word or deed more honor than is due a person. So physical fitness was understood even in Aristotle's day to aid the health of women, even pregnant women. So as he says in the Politics, women who are with child should be careful of themselves. They should take exercise and have a nourishing diet. The first of these prescriptions, the legislator will easily carry into effect by requiring that they should take a walk daily to some temple where they can worship the gods who preside over birth. Again, paganism. But their minds, however, unlike their bodies, they ought to keep quiet, for the offspring derive their natures from their mothers as plants do from earth. So he's going to even give us this little jab at the end that, yay, exercise and don't be too talky. So objection number 7, I recently had a baby and I can't imagine focusing on my weight right now. So the period of time after having a baby presents one of the greatest dangers to your long-term weight and appearance, precisely because it is such a good time to give up. And honestly, this is really a trap, because this is usually when women just start packing on more and more weight because they're not really losing the weight from the pregnancy. And then they're kind of in that time after the pregnancy where they legitimately, understandably just want to rest and, spend time with their baby. And then they're just adding more and more with the next pregnancies. So remember, with today's high-tech exercise equipment and advanced sports science, everyday women like you and me, you and I are maintaining trim figures into their 70s. So there's lots of things you can do around your house, even with your baby, or around your neighborhood with your baby, that you can do to kind of incorporate this into your routine. Likely your stamina will not be the same after childbirth as it was before, and you will have to build it back up again. Resuming regular activity also helps women struggling from postpartum depression. I remember this time that, I was fairly active. We were doing some running. This pregnancy, I really had to lay low for health reasons. I really wasn't supposed to be on my feet too much. And it was very difficult. Even somebody who exercises fairly frequently, I say this as a word of encouragement to you, because after a baby, you're just exhausted, and you might even physically feel like, oh gosh, I just don't feel like I physically have it in me to go out there and do that. But I found, going through that myself, even somebody who had done quite a bit of exercise, I was very, very depressed and shocked how hard it was for me after this last baby to really get that energy back. I thought, there must be something wrong. But I found that once I started to go and start slow with exercise again, it actually built up fairly quickly. And it was just a great transition into just regaining that routine. So regarding the mental health benefits of exercise postpartum, Healthline states researchers in Australia explain that exercise may have an antidepressant effect on women with PPD, postpartum depression. In particular, walking with a baby in a stroller might be an easy way to get in some steps and to breathe fresh air. In a study published in Mental Health and Physical Activity, walking was found to be a statistically significant way to ease depression. Can't fit in a long exercise session? Try working out for 10 minutes a few times during the day. I never struggled with PPD. Something I do get quite often after my babies were born, all of them actually, is I get real high anxiety where I'm just very worried about them. This probably comes from the fact that my first daughter was born with very severe medical issues. So now every time I have a baby, it's just almost kind of like inbuilt in me to really worry and to stress out about how they're doing their health-wise. And I found that this is true for me. Once I was able to just get my baby in the stroller, go out in the fresh air, just walk around. I'm not just in my house worrying and kind of fretting over my baby. This really did help me get through some of the anxiety I myself had. Objection 8. What if my husband isn't being kind about my weight loss and is uncharitably pressuring me into slimming down? So if your husband is struggling to articulate his sexual frustration in a respectful and kind manner, you should definitely have a conversation with him about that. However, to try to dismiss the temptation to postpone your need for positive health changes simply because your husband is behaving unkindly. Don't fall into the trap that he's being a jerk. I don't need to do anything different. Such changes are good for your health and marital intimacy, no matter how much insensitivity your husband may be lacing his frustration with. Remember, this is very important to men. Most of them don't know how to bring it up. And when they do, it's probably going to be very clunky or very maybe unsophisticated at first. So, I mean, imagine being in this situation as a man and you want to bring this up to a woman. It's just rife with confrontation. So it's probably not going to be said. It's either going to be almost a little too gingerly stated or maybe a little bit too brusque. But if your husband is struggling with this, you really ought to sit down and just have a conversation with him and just say, I need more encouragement in a way that encourages me, not makes me feel bad about myself. So try articulating to him how his insensitivity hinders rather than encourages your progress, and how he needs to reevaluate how he addresses you on that matter. Your husband has the right, I always say this, your husband has the right to impose upon you a binding request pertaining to physical, marital, and spiritual health, but he is required by the faith to do so charitably. He's also to keep all of his, this is a quote, he is also to keep all of his family in order, to correct their morals, fix their respective employments, and to see that they discharge them with fidelity. So in my experience, I've literally never once met a marital couple whose husband was too forward and jerky about this, as described above. I'm sure these scenarios exist. In our era, the problem is actually the opposite. Such a man that is so afraid of hurting his wife's feelings or having a fight or her throwing a tantrum or her withholding sex from him because she's upset about him bringing this up, that they usually stay away from this topic or pretend it's not a problem at all. So I include this in the book because such a man who's being a jerk about it is theoretically possible. So objection 9, my husband prefers a bigger frame and losing weight would actually go against his preferences. Sometimes we hear this one. So if you are married to a man whose preference is legitimately for bigger gals, I say knock yourself out within regard to health standards, meaning you don't want a cardiovascular problem or diabetes when you're in your early 30s. But the fact of the matter is that most men desire the opposite. It's just facts. The trick is finding out if your husband truly feels this way or if he is lying so as to avoid a difficult conversation with you. Some men claim to be attracted to bigger women because they don't want to share their true feelings with their wives and by extension cause a huge altercation or cause hurt feelings. So listening to your husband without becoming indignant encourages him to be honest with you about his feelings in the future, which is very important for a lasting communication with your marriage. After all, honest conversations are vital to maintaining a healthy and vibrant marital life, as hard as that might be sometimes. There has never been one time, and Tim does not do this often with me, but there are times that he has to sit me down and say, this isn't good for you, whatever it may be. I really think you should do X, Y, or Z. That even if those are difficult to hear at first, there's never been one time he has said that to me, that if I didn't follow through with his advice, that I did not feel better about myself or it did improve my life in some ways. That's what being a best friend is about is noticing, not just in your marriage, but even if you have girlfriends or what have you, if there's something that they're doing that's harming themselves, is to step into that uncomfortable position and say, listen, I love you. I care for you so much that I'm willing for you to be a little bit mad at me, but this is what's good for you, and you need to do this. Now, our husbands particularly have that right over us as wives. They have the duty, and we have the duty to listen to them when they do that. So this is not something that you're even allowed to just brush off and say, oh, I'm not going to listen to him. No, you have to listen to him. You have to listen to your husband when he takes you aside. So objection 10, what if I'm currently at a healthy weight and my husband still wishes for me to lose weight? So if your husband's preferences are contrary to what's advisable for your physical health, perhaps you could ask him to accompany you to your physician's office to discuss the matter with your doctor. Perhaps hearing your doctor explain the effects of being underweight, perhaps hearing your doctor explain the effects of being underweight will help put things into perspective. Adverse health effects from being underweight include malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, anemia, osteoporosis from too little vitamin D and calcium, decreased immune function, increased risk for complications from surgery, fertility issues caused by irregular menstrual cycles. So hopefully once your husband understands how being underweight affects your overall health and the ability to bear children, he will defer to your doctor's recommendations. In any case, you should probably discuss with your primary doctor whether taking in a few more calories a day would allow you to exercise so as to enjoy the many health benefits exercising provides. I've known women who are very naturally very, very slight. So if they're really, going after the Peloton a lot during the week, it would be quite unhealthy for them to lose that weight. But those are situations that I've heard from them. They say that their doctors are like, no, you still need to exercise. It's still good for you, even if you are a good weight or very slender. You just need to up your calorie intake so that you can do this, because it's not just good for your physical attractiveness and all of that, but it's really good for your cardiovascular health and all the things that we mentioned earlier. Objection 11. It is a lie that being overweight is harmful to my health. So I say this is a tremendous lie generated by and perpetuated by the so-called body positivity movement. It is a biological given that being overweight is harmful to your health. More importantly, if you're a Catholic and the weight gain is voluntary, then it is also harmful to your soul. Healthcare professionals have long agreed that obesity puts you at a greater risk for diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, so on and so forth. Cancer and stroke. More important than body integrity is moral integrity as Catholics, which is also adversely affected by gluttony, which is and remains a mortal sin. We don't talk about that one very often. That one's another one that we kind of just sweep under the rug, the gluttony issue and mortal sin. I'll read this quote I have from Father Edward on page 88. Let me see, 188. Talking about this, because we just too often, unless somebody's murdering somebody or cheating on their wives, we don't really want to talk about sin in other areas of life, like gluttony. Let me find this. So that's 188. Okay, so this is a Catholic priest, Father Edward. And he talks about gluttony. He says, gluttony is a disordered use of food of the pleasure that eating and drinking gives us, which we all know, right? The pleasure itself is part of God's plan. He made food to taste good. He gave us taste buds. It is no sin to enjoy food, to prepare good food, and to have cake at a birthday party, etc. The point is when we become unreasonable in our pursuit of this pleasure. This leads to disordered attachment, damage to our health, and spiritual damage too. Perhaps you are asking a question because you sense that you might be crossing or being tempted to cross the line into gluttony. That might be a reason to pause and see if the Holy Spirit is causing you to a greater spirit of sacrifice. Foregoing a little food at each meal is a nice way to practice self-discipline and to show solidarity with the poor of the world. It can certainly discipline us to better stand up to other and worse temptations of the flesh. And then he goes on to the catechism. This is a really great point that I think gets overlooked. Tim and I talk about this when we eat with random people, that there's somebody called the food thinker when you go out to eat, and it's the person that you are eating with in a social setting. Huh? Is a person that you're supposed to be eating at a restaurant with for social reasons, and you're trying to have restaurants are supposed to be, people communing together, getting to know one another, enjoying one another's time. And this is the person that's immediately has to look at the menu. They're just focused on the menu the whole time. They're like looking around for their food to come. They're not really paying attention to the other people in the room. Food really has become an absolute addiction for people in this country. And I've noticed, and many other priests have talked about this as well, is that if you have such an attachment to that, how are you going to, as a good Catholic, withhold or just go through more severe discomforts? If even hunger, just the building of hunger drives you that mad, or you're in that much discomfort that you just can't think about anything else. There are far worse things that your body can go through. Think about the martyrs. Think about things that people have gone through. Hunger really shouldn't be something that we're paying that much attention to, in a way that we're allowing ourselves to really abuse the practice of eating. So I say it's simply not rational for anyone to assert that obesity isn't catastrophic to the health of women. Denying this fact only puts women's health, souls, and marriages in great danger. This body positivity movement really is just a way of destroying the family, destroying women's self-esteem and their health. It's horrible. It's absolutely terrible for women. So last word on these objections. So ladies, if your husband is asking you to focus more on your health, exercise, and eating habits, don't be upset at him. Once you begin losing weight, I guarantee you'll be thanking him. You'll be feeling much better about yourself. And I'll leave you to figure out the best way to thank your husband. Is all I have to say on that part. Okay, next section. Don't act like a giant contraceptive. So we're talking about the physical before. Now we're talking about our behaviors in marriage. And I say, do not act like a giant contraceptive. Keeping a healthy appearance is one part of sustaining physical and emotional intimacy in a marriage. The other part lies in maintaining the right disposition. Accordingly, this section will address the attitudes and behaviors which objectively obstruct the potential for marital intimacy. In other words, don't act like a giant contraceptive. It is an undeniable and objective truth that if the fundamentals of your marriage are not up to par in the marital bedroom, your relationship fails to be up to par everywhere else. That's called sexual frustration. Men and women must take particular care to look after the sexual needs of their spouses, and that means not blundering blithely through one's domestic routine and acting like a giant contraceptive. Among these avoidable states are acts and dispositions such as the silent treatment, excessive solitary activities, excessive inactivity, nagginess, bossiness, moodiness, and the worst of all, which seems to result from all of the above, is closing yourself off sexually to your husband or making him feel guilty or bad for requesting sex with you. All right, so those who are married made promises before God to dedicate their bodies to their spouses for the marital debt, sex. This is why I dedicated so much of time discussing the importance of bodily health in the previous section. But what good is bodily health if your behavioral health is foreclosing your marital affection? So let's dive into the most controversial truth of married Catholic sexual ethics, that spouses are not allowed to, without just reason, deny the other the satisfaction of the marital debt. And this actually is the one time that we have egalitarianism in Scripture. This actually applies equally to the husband and to the wife. So the angelic doctor, St. Thomas Aquinas, and the Summa answers the question whether one spouse is bound to pay the debt, sex, to the other at a bestial time, averring that since the wife has the power over her husband's body and vice versa with regard to the act of procreation, the one is bound to pay the debt to the other at any season or hour with due regard to the decorum required in such matters. So obviously when you're not like at the Cracker Barrel like at a public scene, for this must not be done at once openly. They do this at the car. So St. Thomas then goes on to say, for it is ordained by God on account of the weakness of the flesh that the debt must always be paid to the one who asks, lest he be afforded an occasion of sin. And let's just be honest, it's outright cruel. If your husband is coming to you and he is in the mood for sexual relations with you and you're just batting him away, not only is that cruel to your husband's feelings and I'm sure not helping his self-esteem, men have feelings too, but it really does send a message of like, no, I'm not open to the one flesh that I signed up for on my marriage day. Okay, so I'm going to read a passage on 191 from Colleen McCluskey. Let me see if I can find that real quick. Okay. Move this over. So she says, okay, she's a philosopher. And she says, Aquinas partitions these duties along the lines of traditional division of labor, according to which men operate the so-called public sphere and women operate in the private sphere. Nevertheless, at least one of these duties is the same. That is what comes to be called, that is why it becomes to be called the marriage debt. The marriage debt requires that each partner acquiesce to a demand for sex by the other partner. In the later Middle Ages, it was commonly held that men and women were equal with respect to the marriage debt. Each partner was obligated to satisfy the debt, and each partner had the right to demand its satisfaction. Satisfying the partner's demand was never sinful, regardless of the other's motivation for the demand. Whether the demand itself was sinful depended upon the reasons one had for making it. Since in the eyes of most of the medieval theologians, beginning with Augustine, the only proper motivation for sex, even within marriage, was procreation. Any other reason would have constituted at least a venial sin on the part of the one making the request. So some of the earlier guys had some dispute about where sin. What was it, Tim, with the venial thing with marital relations? Some of them thought that it was a venial sin when you're not actively procreating. A lot of them have since, a lot of discussion has had 17th century. Right. They're a little bit confused about that. Right. This is just to add gloss to this issue that it is weirdly, this is like the one time that we have scripture that's egalitarian. The man has the rights over the woman and the woman can call that debt in just as equally as the man can. And that makes sense when we think about the weakness of the flesh as it's proposed. So more importantly, Holy Scripture also tackles the issue. Of course, in 1 Corinthians, it is stated, but because the temptation of immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not rule over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not rule over his own body, but the wife does. Do not refuse one another, except perhaps by agreement for a season, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again, lest Satan tempt you through a lack of self-control. And medieval historian Dr. Elizabeth Makowski sums up the above scriptural verses perfectly, and she says the Apostle Paul was the earliest influential spokesman for the Christian view of marriage and sexuality. Marital sex was for Paul a safeguard against human weakness, and that makes sense. We understand that we have a weakness of the flesh, and this is why marital debt within marriage is a great, wonderful thing that you should take advantage of often. So on the topic of marital debt being sanctioned by divine law, the 20th century encyclical Casti Connubii becomes again relevant. And it says, the second blessing of matrimony, which we said was mentioned by St. Augustine, is the blessing of the conjugal honor, which consists in the mutual fidelity of the spouses in fulfilling the marriage contract, so that what belongs to one of the parties by reason of this contract sanctioned by divine law may not be denied to him or permitted to any third person, or may there be conceded to one of the parties anything which, being contrary to the rights and laws of God and entirely opposed to matrimonial faith, can never be conceded. Basically just says the same thing, that marriage debt is real. You are owed that to one another when it is called in. So due to the strong mutual sexual desire designed by God within husbands and wives, it would be cruel for one spouse to deny the other the satisfaction of the debt. However, there are instances when one spouse can deny the other, like in a time of severe illness, or if a spouse is requesting sexual acts which are not licit. Remember, we are, as wives, allowed to disobey or not to acquiesce to a request by our husband if they're asking us to do something that involves a mortal sin. So if your husband's like, yes, we're going to have intercourse now, but we are going to use contraception, you could say no, that I'm not going to commit mortal sin. So common excuses like being too tired or not in the mood do not meet the standard for denying your spouse this fundamental right. Twitter flipped out when I wrote this, but I think if you really evaluate the human natures that we have, that is specifically talked about in Scripture, the weakness of the flesh, it makes perfect sense that there should be only specific instances, rather severe instances, where one spouse can deny the other because of all of the ramifications that follow when a spouse closes him or herself off sexually to her spouse. Not only is that incredibly demoralizing and demeaning for one spouse to request it and the other one say no, but it's sending all sorts of horrible messages on the intimacy scale. Like there's just so many things that are wrong about that act. It's become almost a funny thing that people talk about, oh, this wife's too tired or not in the mood. But it's really tried to evaluate how you would feel as a woman, which probably doesn't happen that often. If you're propositioning your husband and he's like, nah, I'm too tired. That would be incredibly hurtful. And I implore women to realize that men also have feelings, and that sort of thing might be funny on a sitcom, but in real life, it's very hurtful, and it really isn't a good enough reason. Now, a lot of women said, well, I just had baby, and my husband shouldn't call it in if he knows I'm really struggling or I'm really having a hard time right now. That's an issue of prudence that you should have a conversation with your husband. But if your husband is asking for it, that means they need it. All right. So unfortunately, some Catholics greatly misinterpret the marital debt as a license for an angry husband to force his unwilling wife to have intercourse with church sanction. This is far from the truth. This is something that leftists love to use as a tactic against an uncomfortable truth. They'll rush to the worst case scenario, and you'll see this all over the internet. Somebody says something reasonable that might at first seem, that might be a little bit hard to accept. And it's always the leftist in the room that rushes straight to the worst case scenario. Well, what if a husband is raping his wife? I mean, it's obvious what they're trying to do here. Undermine Scripture and human nature and just common sense. So common sense dictates that this scaremongering is, of course, nonsensical. The point is that, according to St. Thomas, the wife or the husband assumes a mortal sin upon his soul for denying what is rightly owed to their spouse by God, unless there is a legitimate reason, as previously stated. When we talk about the mortal sin of denying a spouse, people don't realize that that's the case. It is a case, and here we go. Here's Aquinas. I honestly, when I added this into the book, people didn't even believe this quote when I gave it, but it's true. And also it just makes sense. So Aquinas states, if the husband be rendered incapable of paying the debt through a cause consequent upon marriage, for instance, through having already paid the debt and being unable to pay it, the wife has no right to ask again. And in so doing, she behaves like a harlot rather than a wife. But if he be rendered incapable through some other cause, then if this be lawful cause, he is not bound and she cannot ask. But if it be an unlawful cause, then he sins, and his wife's sin, should she fall into fornication on this account, is somewhat imputable to him. Hence, he should endeavor to do his best that his wife may remain continent. What this is saying here is that not only is it a mortal sin, but he's even going a bit further, and he's saying that if you're denying your spouse sex, and they're asking you for that, and they're trying to engage you in that way, and you're constantly, no, 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 no. And your spouse goes and he commits a mortal sin on behalf of that. We know with the online pornography, all this stuff that the sin, you know what sin we're talking about these day and age. Aquinas is even saying that that sin that your husband commits because you denied him is also on you, because you are participating in him going off because of your rejection. So that, when I read that, I was like, okay, wow, people are not going to like that. Okay, so many women deny their husband's sex for reasons they foolishly presume to be legitimate, like exhaustion from caring for children and housework. These do not constitute legitimate reasons. Further, a woman's daily schedule should be thoughtfully crafted to increase opportunities for marital intimacy. I say this all the time, and I mean it. We are wives first, we are mothers second. We are wives first, we are mothers second. Doesn't mean your kids are going without food or any of that sort of thing. I'm saying make time in your schedule. If you have to do laundry later, if you have to do work things around, to make your marriage as strong as it could be, because that does affect your children and the way the people that they go out and meet and the marriages that they will have. It's good for you and your spouse. It's good for God's kingdom that you make your marriage as strong as possible. So I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to briefly address a sad reality that many women currently struggle with, and that is post-traumatic stress caused by past sexual abuse. So a minority of women have written me, and they say that they denied their husband sex for a multitude of greater reasons, such as sexual abuse suffered earlier in their lives. As much as they want to enjoy the conjugal act, something holds them back. Until they got married, most of these poor souls were unaware of how their trauma would affect their marital intimacy, since their husbands were the first men that they were willingly intimate with. So I encourage such women to seek professional help now if there are single women out there that see this could be an issue for them, so you don't cause further suffering to you or your spouse by being unable to perform your wifely duties. It's very sad. I get many emails from couples that this was the case in somebody's past, that they were abused and then they got married, and then it really came to roost, all the ramifications for that. And it's very sad because both people are, legitimately in love with one another and wanting to express themselves to their spouse sexually, but it becomes a humongous hurdle. So if you could handle that now, if you can do the things that you can do now to really help yourself to overcome those difficulties, your future spouse and your future marriage will thank you for it. And secondarily, I say I offer my prayers to any woman who is struggling in this regard, and also always seek St. Joseph's intercession for strength for you and your husband to bear this cross patiently until God sees fit to bring healing. So if you are young and unmarried and foresee having these issues because of past abuse, communicate this with your future husband before marriage so that you can heal quicker. This is not something you want to discuss after marriage. This is something that both of you need to be aware of before marriage, so that this could be an open issue that you guys can figure out if this is something that is surmountable, that you can get over, and you guys could have a true Catholic marriage. So marriage presents enough challenges on its own. For your sake and for your husbands, don't enter into it with a handicap which might be remedied earlier. And this is a very large handicap. The sex issue is an enormous handicap within marriage. So if you are not, doing well in that regard, usually everything else starts falling apart. And Tim and I try to counsel lots of couples. We spend lots of phone time with couples who just write us emails and they say things, like, can we just talk to you about a couple of things? And it's usually this issue, the marital debt issue. Once that's not being tended to, the dominoes just start falling. So don't deny your spouse. So even if you're a woman with 10 plus children, you ought to be putting your husband first. Too many wives falsely claim this to be a preposterous notion, since children, unlike men, require constant care and attention. Usually, moreover, those making this claim do not have 13 children. Usually, you hear this women say, well, my husband's not a child, and they'll have like one child. And they usually mean that, like, I'm not going to make his favorite meal, or he'll just take what I get him. So they miss the point. This is not so much the husband who needs constant care, but rather the relationship. In our marriage, Tim and I, we try to make time in the evening and the morning just for us. Oftentimes we don't get to do that, but that is the goal. So I'll explain how we do that later in the section. So this quality time really helps us to keep frustrations and annoyances at bay. I've had to reschedule or reevaluate my schedule with each new addition to our family. Dynamics change in the family with each child that we've added. I've had twins, so that was a big adjustment right there. So every time after I have a child, I really encourage young Catholic couples that the husband and the wife should sit down together after a baby is born. Just say, hey, this is what we're doing really well. This is what I miss how we were beforehand. What can we do different so that we can really increase our marital intimacy? Babies obviously are very time consuming for young women and for mothers. So no one's saying don't tend to your child. I'm just saying, please remember that your husband will oftentimes feel neglected if so much time is only dedicated to just getting this baby fed and happy and all these things. Remember your relationship as well. So it is obvious that domestic duties become subjectively harder when a wife is not connecting emotionally with her husband. And the kids pick that up too. So when we become too focused on our wifely schedules, duties, chores, bills, we naturally begin relating to our husbands more like roommates and less like Christian spouses, which I will say to you, constantly ask yourself when you're in the grind and you're feeling a little overwhelmed with your schedule. I do this for myself all the time. Oh gosh, I have so much to do. Gotta get the house clean. We have guests coming. Have a new baby, whatever it is. Just ask yourself, are we acting like roommates and not like as like boyfriend, girlfriend? Like we're excited about each other. If that's the case, then just fix it. Try to do everything you can to fix that. So when the inevitable drift occurs periodically in my household, this is usually after I have a baby and things are just hectic. My husband and I always notice the phenomenon early and address it quickly. Every time after, I think, our third child, Tim will sit down with me and he'll say, okay, like this is what we need to do to get back on track. So you and I are, getting along well. We're really enjoying our time together. You're not feeling so stressed out about the baby or the chores or this, that, and the other thing. It's a really great time to kind of get together with your spouse and just be like, okay, what are you frustrated about? I'll tell you what I'm frustrated about. Let's work through this. Learning the art of cutting corners. I know trad wives out there probably don't want to hear this, but that's the truth. Learning the art of cutting corners on small tasks throughout the day is one way we have recouped time for our marriage. I don't need to defeather a chicken that I raised in the backyard if it means that I'm not going to have much time with my husband, or if those sorts of things are going to cause frustration, or I'm going to be kind of a pain in the neck, or I'm going to be in a bad mood. I'd rather just relate nicely to my husband and buy my chicken at the grocery store. So even though many of us have been told not to cut corners, you cannot put a price on quality time with your husband and children. These precious moments do add up. Being a trad wife doesn't require the butchering and defeathering of your own hand-raised chickens. The first mark of a happy home is not organically hand-washed laundering, but rather a close union of its head and its heart. People are going to walk into your house. They're not going to care whether or not you're making everything from scratch. They will be able to tell, however, if you and your husband are not on the same page and it's a bit awkward and you're not really relating well to one another. Household intimacy is the fruit of time together and time spent playing, praying, working, reading, resting, and even getting bored together. Fancy the notion. Shamefully, family time is being systematically eradicated in favor of busying the kids with outside activities. Okay, I get people don't like this, but I say a lot of times with Tim and I, we don't like putting our kids in activities, and it's not anything against our kids, but I find that most people on the weekends, they just fill their weekend with just carting the kids around to soccer, this, that, and the other thing. Unless your kid is a really strong interest in those things and a real talent, that time really could be spent better as a family, I say. It's not that we don't do those things. We have our kids in piano right now because some of them had an interest, but it's just the need in American suburbs to just fill all of your empty time with activity or chores, time off, resting, praying, hanging around your house. These are the things that help families grow stronger to one another, not just one dad's taking the son to baseball, this one's going over here. It really divides the household, and it's not necessary unless your kid becomes Kobe Bryant or something. So it's much better just to spend that time as a family, keep the parents and the kids around unless somebody has a very strong interest in something. Okay. So you don't cease to be your husband's girlfriend after you become his wife. So I say flirt with your husband every day. As odd as that may sound, all it means is that you should try to be as demonstrative of your affections as you were when you were his girlfriend. Tim has this great thing in his book that he talks about. If you watch any modern sitcom where there's a young single woman who gets married later in the series, think about Pam Beesly from The Office, think about Daphne Moon from Frasier. At the beginning of the series, they're very affable, very feminine, very lithe, very enthusiastic. They're always there to help the guy and be their biggest cheerleader. After marriage, boom, frowning faces, unhappy, nagging, all of that stuff. That doesn't have to be the case. You could be Daphne Moon at the season 1, and you can be Daphne Moon all the way through to season what is the end of that season? I think it's like 10 seasons. You can be 11. You could be as pleasant and lovely as you were when you were a girlfriend, when you were really trying to get your husband's attention and to show him what a great person you are. You should do that even more so after marriage. That shouldn't just be when you're trying to get his attention. So dressing up how he likes, taking an interest in his day, complimenting him, showing him how much you need him for small and large things, and flirting with him are all to-do list items that should be done far more frequently than just on special occasions. This is not just it's Valentine's Day or your husband's birthday and you ask him what his favorite outfit is. You should try to be doing this every single day. Too many women, ever mindful of getting their share of adulation and praise and visible tokens of affection, forget that men need those affirmations as well. Far more often, flirtation is constituted in subtler ways by taking an active interest in what he's doing, so his work, his hobbies, his interests. So doing offers many increased opportunities for daily intimacy. Don't just take an interest, actively join him in such interests. So my husband loves basketball. I know nothing about basketball. My husband wanted to start a podcast. I knew nothing about that at all. So I found that once you just kind of like, you know what, if this is what you want to do, I'm going to learn how to do this. I'm going to do some of this with you. It really becomes a great time for us to spend time with each other, even when he's kind of doing things he either doesn't like to do or his hobbies, things that he does like to do. Okay, so truly the little things count when trying to impart to your husband that you still find him alluring, interesting, and fun to be around. This is very simple. I got some great advice from some of Tim's relatives on this stuff. And it really was like simple advice, but it's the great thing. Just still be your husband's girlfriend after you're married. As well as working toward a shared goal or taking an interest in his hobbies, wives should also compliment their husbands often and tell them what they're doing right. So this is not always, you always see this where wives are telling us what they did wrong or what they could do better. Really try to be mindful to take the time if your husband does something right, especially things that you know he doesn't naturally do, but he does for you. Like my husband, like when he gets ready, he'll just throw his stuff around. But if I know he knows that I'm like, oh, can we put things in like the laundry basket? If he tends to do that, I know he's doing that for me. That's not how he was as a single man. He just tossed it. He's doing that for me, making sure you're thanking your husband and noticing those things that he's doing for you from the big to the very small that he's doing correctly or things that you appreciate. Have you noticed, like I have, that men have become the focus of everyone's derision? Men are being told that their masculinity is offensive and that that leading their own rightful households is misogynistic. Even if you don't subscribe to such nonsense, ask yourself when was the last time that you told your husband he was doing something you appreciate? So I say, do not badmouth your husband ever. Never. Don't do it. Wifely complaints about husbands in social settings has gotten completely out of hand. If you have a friend who partakes in this, I implore you to tell her how ridiculous she sounds and that you won't have any part of it. Women do this in social settings because they think that's a way of like getting on with other women. If more women stood up and they're like, this is your best friend. This is the man that you chose to spend your life with. This is not appropriate. I'm not going to be part of you talking about your husband in this way. So if one hears a wife running her husband down in public, and this goes, if you're yourself doing this, the only proper response is declaring, I'm sorry I cannot be party to this, while exiting the room. One thing I know about women is they don't like to be shamed. And one thing I know about women is that they need to be shamed far more. So this tactic works, believe me. So this should be obvious. But men have feelings too, and everyone likes approval. Men, like women, need encouragement and affection. And in some ways, I've learned after almost 2 decades of marriage, men need it more. I encourage wives to stop what they're doing each day when your husband returns from work. Meet him at the door, give him a kiss. When mapping out your meal plans for the week, ask your husband if there's a special meal he'd like you to cook or things that he prefers. Don't indulge in sour attitudes as he'll take what I give him. I see too many women that are just like, I'm just going to do whatever the hell I'm going to do, and he can take it or leave it. That is a crappy attitude. Don't indulge in that. Remember, you still want to be your husband's girlfriend. Remember when you were still you're really excited about this guy, and you're like, I really hope he asks me to marry him. And how are you behaving then? Keep on keeping on that attitude. So men also appreciate gifts, compliments, and love letters. I try to write my husband a long love letter every now and again, just to tell him specifically. I'll list out how much I love him and in what ways I am proud of him. Instead of sending text messages during the day, this one might be kind of hard for some people, but instead of sending text messages to your husband with requests or reprimands or reminders about boring material, or what just things that are the kids just did this, that, or the other thing. Try to send him spontaneous compliments or tell him how much you miss him when he's away. Those are much more enjoyable text messages to get. So also fill in his gaps by completing tasks he hates. Tim hates anything with organization. He doesn't know, I say this often, how any of this stuff over here works, the camera, anything, and you have it read. He will come up here when it's time to do a podcast, and he will sit down, and it's just everything is, I start, I stop, I do all of the stuff for him because he hates that stuff, but he loves to do what he does. So fill in your husband's gaps, whatever they may be. But if your husband doesn't like organization or he doesn't like doing X, Y, or Z, help him out. None of the above ideas are intellectually groundbreaking, but they don't need to be. Old formula work. Little acts of kindness and flirtation throughout the day, properly implemented, send your husband the irrepressible message that you are still attracted to him and remain deeply honored he chose you to be his wife. So I think this passage on page 205, which I'm about to read, is from a saint of the Catholic Church that will blow your mind. Let me see if that's it. Yeah. Okay. So are you ready for this? Saint Jose Maria. This is a great thing that he has to say. So this is the founder of Opus Dei. Many of you know who he is, great saint. He says, if marriage is to preserve its initial charm and beauty, both husband and wife should try to renew their love day after day, and that is done through sacrifice, with smiles, and also with ingenuity. Is it surprising that a husband who arrives home tired from work begins to lose patience when his wife keeps on and on about everything she thinks has gone wrong during the day? Disagreeable things can wait for a better moment when the husband is less tired and more disposed to listen to them. Another important thing is personal appearance. And I would say that any priest who says the contrary is a bad advisor. As years go by, a woman who lives in the world has to take more care, not only of her interior life, but also of her looks. Her interior life requires her to be careful about her personal appearance. Naturally, this should always be in keeping with her age and circumstance. I often say jokingly that older facades need more restoration. Isn't that the truth? It is the advice of, he says, it is the advice of a priest. An old Spanish saying goes, a well-groomed woman keeps her husband away from other doors. That is why I am not afraid to say that women are responsible for 80% of the infidelities of their husbands, because they do not know how to win them each day and take loving and considerate care of them. Again, this is a Catholic priest and saint that said this. A married woman's attention should be centered on her husband and the children, as a married man's attention should be centered on his wife and children. Much time and effort is required to succeed in this, and anything which mitigates against it is bad and should not be tolerated. There is no excuse for fulfilling this lovable duty. Work outside the home is not an excuse. Not even one's life of piety can be an excuse because it is incompatible with one's daily obligations. It is not good nor pleasing to God. If a married woman's first concern has to be her home. There is an Aragonese saying which goes, if through going to church to pray a woman burns her stew, she may be half an angel, but she's half a devil too. And Jose Maria ends this by saying, I say she was a fully fledged devil. So not parsing too many of the words there on that one. So I just say, I leave you with just win your husbands every single day, ladies. Do everything you can to increase marital intimacy. And I wish you all the strongest, happiest, most intimate marriages possible.